Do you see that CNN article that was like, inflation is good for poor people and bad for rich people?
It's ridiculous.
It's the Hunger
bad
Games.
for everyone.
That article, but it's substantially worse for the poor.
That's right.
That article was, I'm like watching the Hunger Games and Stanley Tucci is sitting up on stage going, don't worry, inflation is bad for the rich people. I'm like, if you're rich, you can convert your
That's scary good, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's scary good.
If you're rich, you can convert your cash into real estate, into gold, into Bitcoin, into hard assets. And if you're poor, you can't.
That's right.
You can't. It's just substantially harder. So every day, your bank account has lower and lower buying power.
That's right.
Rich people are like, about a painting.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and interestingly enough, inflation is literally as flat as a tax can get. Everyone loses the exact same percentage of spending power off of every dollar they have. You made a point earlier about not being able to multiply wealth by dividing it. And I think there's one exception, and I believe you'll agree with it based on what you've said, but there is one way to multiply wealth by dividing it, which is just through voluntary trade and people who own their own businesses making the decision to spend in specific places so that their money goes to somebody who's making a product that adds wealth to the economy. But when it comes to the federal government doing it, they're completely inept.
You could, to grow wealth by dividing it, like one way would be like if you're with a bunch of people in a tribe and they don't have shoes, but you need to go hunting, you could give everybody a little pair of shoes of yours. That's distributing your wealth. And now they can all go hunting and they're going to be better at it. And
That's called an investment, though.
That's exactly right.
So that's so giving. But what if you
again,
gave them money to go buy?
And that's also
shoes?
done by the people and for the people. You know, it's not government basically just printing out dollars for their own agendas, for their own points of legislation.
But let me give you a better example, Ian, because I do like where you're at on this idea. You know, that you could have a bunch of shoes, give them out, and then everyone is better off. But the problem is what our government is doing is there's a tribe of people, and one guy has, 5 pairs of shoes, everybody else has one, and there's one guy with no shoes. So the chief comes in, takes 4 of the pairs of shoes from the rich guy, and then sells them to pay for Pakistani gender studies.
Yeah.
Well, 25 million actually. But
Right.
remember, that was technically, though, and this is what I love. Let me tell you, the Democrats have gotten brilliant about the labeling of bills. And like, for example, the bill you're talking about, the America Rescue Bill, where $25 million goes to Pakistan for gender research programs. How does that help the average American? I know myself. I was sitting at home thinking, God, I really wish my money could go to gender research in Pakistan. I mean,
I was really concerned.
And here's the question that nobody asks about this kind of thing. In some circumstances, you might be able to argue that foreign aid is a legitimately charitable thing to do, but can you name a single country that went from a developing country to a developed country because the United States government threw enough money at it? When has it ever worked?
Well, and only
Afghanistan.
Yeah, look at that.
Yeah, well, I guess that's a touchy one.
I mentioned it to Thomas Massey. I was like, why don't we just, instead of giving aid, borrowing from the Federal Reserve, giving it to another country, why don't they just borrow it from the reserve? But what I should have said is just, why don't they borrow it from their own central bank and leave us out of it and then accrue their own debt? Why do we have to borrow money?
They don't have, so like in the instance of Afghanistan, they don't have the resources or wealth to trade with other countries for advanced technology and development.
Well, but what about China, who just came in there and they're looking to harvest $1.3 trillion of lithium? And who are they going to sell those renewable batteries back to? America.
Yeah.
So I mean, again, they're all of these countries have for the most part something. I mean, people are like, oh, well, what do they have in Kenya or Somalia? Well, they got oil. You know, we saw that in Lake Turkana around that area. So you know, it's the same thing with Afghanistan. You know, they're like, oh, it's nothing but rocks. Well, it's got $1.3 trillion first off in lithium. Not to mention that it's got one of the most mineral rich areas for rubies and emeralds in the entire country. And who's harvesting it? China.
Why don't we invade Alaska?
With music?
mean, it's kind of the joke we have. You know, when we have Jack Posobiec here or like Daniel Turner, they're both like, invade Alaska. I mean, there's tremendous resources there. Why don't we do it? Why don't we use our own resources?
This is the funniest part. We always talk about, you know, the left. Again, the left always talks about climate and environmental, you know, things like this. But we're one of the most environmentally friendly nations that you can think of. I mean, we are exceptionally responsible with our harvesting principles. We are exceptionally responsible. I mean, look, one of the best examples I have, people in Florida were attacking the U.S. sugar and some of these companies saying that they were actually destroying the waterways. They weren't talking about runoffs and spill-offs, things like that. They pointed it to the fingers of agriculture. What they didn't look at is that this same company over-generates through their refineries 25,000 kilowatts and gives it back to the actual people. But so we're one of the most responsible, but yet we'll go and buy and import from China, Russia, and all the others who have the least responsible way of harvesting. And then we're okay with that. Again, it's like your food analogy, right? It's like, why would you kill that animal? Why don't you just go to the store where, you know,
no animals were harmed?
Exactly. I mean, that's exactly what we're looking at.
Agreed, man.
We want to prevent ourselves in America from being able to do things which we do more responsibly. but we're going to turn a blind eye to how it's done abroad.
It's a big trick.
It's
a big
hypocrisy.
Trick. So a lot of people complained about the Trump administration removing environmental protections for companies. What they didn't realize was that was because it was the only way to bring companies back to the United States. So pros and cons. I mean, you can say it's a bad thing. By all means, you're free to say so. I'm not saying it's a good thing. That's why he did it. When we say to a company, you've got to spend more on your minimum wage, when we say we're going to raise your taxes, when we say we're going to regulate you to make it impossible for you to work, and then we say, but any product you make overseas can enter this country with no taxes, what do you think those companies are going to do?
And by the way,
I would be like China.
I would completely abolish the EPA. Let me just tell you, as a business owner, they literally were. I wanted to create a training facility for one of the law enforcement departments, right? And they had someone who came out and did an environmental study to make sure that there was no ferns or any type of like protected thing out there, right? So they said, oh, no, you can't build here. And then all of a sudden out of the blue, they were like, unless you pay this $60,000 environmental credit, and then we'll allow you to do it. I mean, look, it's the biggest scheme in the world. I mean, I had to actually ask the EPA for permission to build on my land that I owned, that I was donating back to the law enforcement department to be able to train on, and then had to pay a $60,000 credit.
And in the meantime, glyphosate, there's studies and evidence that it's causing cancer in farmers, but Monsanto somehow is now using it. Okay, it's an herbicide, or it's a fungicide, and it kills bugs basically. So they're spraying all these crops with this Roundup. Now they're using it as a desiccant, meaning before the vegetables are ready to be harvested, they're not dry, so they spray it with Roundup to dry them out, and then they harvest it. Talk about unethical practices, agriculture practices. We have this wonderful organic system that you got to pay massive amounts of money to get your stuff registered through, and then they're desiccating our crops with toxin.
I've heard these stories, like you were mentioning about the fee and everything. I was watching a video where a guy apparently was working on his own land, and then one day someone shows up and said, you have to stop the development of your property because we saw a bird. They said,
I've even had them have to come. You had to pay money to destroy and properly return the land back to what it was prior to your building.
Wow. Because
they saw a certain kind of tortoise in the area. Or in Florida, for example, not only do you have to go through the EPA roundabout, but then they have to do an ancestral study to make sure that there was no Native Americans who had at one point, they find an arrowhead or something. They're like, oh, no, this was an ancestral land, therefore you can't build.
Yeah, but like, everything is.
Agreed.
So
That's
it's
exactly right.
either there's reasonable development, or there's not, or there's none. I think reasonable development of any land includes real environmental protections.
Agreed.
Obviously, like, we don't want you dumping waste in the rivers and things like that. When you're building a septic system, you'll need like the
pits, etc.
What is it called? What's the field? The leach field.
Yeah.
You'll need a leach field and all that stuff. You got to make sure it's not running off onto someone's property. But when they can abuse their power, the government does.
And they are.
They will.
You got the, what are they called? Neonicotinoid pesticides, which are now, there's evidence that it's disrupting the bees, are like getting it in their system, and then they can't find their way, and then they die off, and they think that's causing colony collapse disorder. It's really irresponsible for the Environmental Protection Agency to be giving Monsanto this kind of power, which is now Bayer. Bayer purchased Monsanto because they wanted to get rid of the bad press from the name.
That's right.
That sounds like a 20 to me.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah. Well, this is what people fail to realize. Whenever you have these large government agencies coming around to regulate any sector of the economy, they just end up in the pocket of the highest bidder. So, of course, Monsanto is going to get away with everything they're doing.
Right. And then for some reason, when you criticize the big corporations that are ripping us off and the government that's selling us out to them, you're the fascist?
Mm-hmm. No. Now you're a domestic terrorist.
Oh, yeah.
Remember, they up the ante on this now. Even poor parents who are just wanting a balanced curriculum in their neighborhoods are domestic terrorists. This has been something that they're just throwing out. And this is why, though, I think Virginia turned red. And I believe this because kitchen table issues. Parents have a right. I'm a father. So I've got two boys, 17 and 7. And so I can tell you right now, do I care about my child's curriculum? You're damn right I do. And these teachers unions are running like the EPA or any of the other big government, and they're just saying, well, it's our way or the highway. And if you oppose it, well, you're a domestic terrorist.
Yeah, that's what I don't like, is when you oppose the government and then all of a sudden you're considered evil because you oppose...
Or you're put on a watch list.
Yeah, government. It's a fascist government.
Well, let's
Yeah.
Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to watch live, you can check out this channel Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. And don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, and if you want more unfiltered and uncensored content with all of these guests, go to timcast.com and become a member. All of these guests you know and love in exclusive segments on our website where we are unrestricted in what we talk about, so you'll definitely not want to miss it. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you all next time.